You'll notice that we have a different configuration of speakers up here, and this is, you may not have noticed, but almost every single panel has been missing one speaker, so because of the flooding, and this one in particular has two missing, but we were very lucky that we got to pull up an additional one from one of our exhibitors who happens to be also in this field. We're going to be speaking to you today about 3D modeling, visualizations, and its implication on management. And several of you, even if you're not technically inclined, may be aware of this because there was a paper that came out in the past year that looked at 3D management as a way for, in Guadalupe County, GCD specifically, as maybe a way of moving towards dealing with these issues of different permitting approaches, so correlative rights and beneficial use and all of the topics that you've been hearing about. So we thought, let's have a discussion about that, bring in a variety of experts that deal with it in a couple of different ways and maybe flesh out the discussion. Unfortunately, Gabe Collins, who was one of the co-authors of that paper, is unable to join us, and Mike Turco as well is unable to join us. So I'd like to ask each of the panelists to give a brief introduction of who they are, what they do, and Mikkel, thank you so much for jumping in last minute and sharing your knowledge with us. Why don't you give us just a brief introduction of yourself?
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Mikkel Irizar. I'm the CEO for Hydromodel Host. We're a groundwater resources management technology company, and we have developed its decision support systems for all the stakeholders in groundwater, from legislators, planners, managers, and users, to be able to have a verifiable and continuous information of the quantity and quality of your aquifers, and also being able to do predictive analytics and being able to do and understand what's going to be the impact of your decisions before making them. So what we've done is integrating both the data side of the business. What we've done is also allowing the user to interact with the models and being able to start using 3D modeling and the 3D visualization. So those two concepts are different for us, and being able to do predictive analytics. That's what we do.
Thank you very much. Michelle, why don't you give us an introduction to yourself?
Sure. Hi, my name is Michelle Sutherland, and I've been doing 3D geologic modeling for the past 10 years. I do a variety of groundwater consulting work, but I find that 3D models are really helpful in communicating the type of work that I do. Now I'm a sole proprietor. I've been on my own for 3 years, and prior to that, I worked with the folks at Daniel B. Stevens and Associates.
Thank you very much. Nate?
I'm Nate Toll. I'm with the Southwest Research Institute. I've been building numerical models for just under 20 years now. Previous to working at Southwest Research Institute, I used to build numerical models for both nuclear repositories to demonstrate safety of disposal of nuclear waste, and then also for the mining industry, both looking at water management and closure issues. And for the last 3 years, I've been working on Texas water resources issues and building models for various regions of Texas.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And Bill, who needs no introduction, but tell us a little bit about who you are and what you've done.
My name is Bill Mullican. I have a small consulting firm out in Pflugerville, Texas. Prior to that, I was at the Texas Water Development Board, where amongst the many programs that I was responsible for included the groundwater availability modeling program. And in fact, in 1998, when we did the original prototype groundwater availability model in the Hill Country, and then subsequent in 99 and 2001 when the legislature not only endorsed but embraced the groundwater availability modeling program, I was heavily involved in that.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, panelists. Welcome. We so appreciated having this incredible group of experts up here. So again, the objective of this panel is to look at 3D modeling and visualization, and those as separate tools, look at them as tools and determine the ways in which they positively affect management, and also the ways in which there may be issues in implementing them in management, and kind of explore that concept a little bit. And so in order to do that, we thought it would be helpful to first start with a definition of what 3D modeling is versus 3D visualization. And to do that, Michelle was very kind to provide us with some visual aids. And so I'll let you kick off the conversation and then maybe have the rest of the panelists chime in on your thoughts on the differences between the definitions of the two.
That'd be great. So this is a slide I put together showing where the 3D models and flow models have similarities and differences. So this is a Venn diagram. On the, in the yellow, this is what GAMs can do that 3D models typically do not address. And then in the blue, this is what geologic models do. Where it's green, they overlap. So you can read the slide. What I wanted to show here was the type of terminology we're using, and I think it gets really confusing because 3D visualization can be used for both the GAMs and 3D geologic models. So to start off, I went to the dictionary. Dictionary.com, what is a model? So a model is a 3D representation of a thing. It's typically on a smaller scale than the original. So we can apply the term to model to many different things. Understanding these different models depends on understanding what their intended purpose is.
Thank you. Bill, could I ask you or Nate, if either one of you would want to chime in, because in our discussions prior to this panel, we did talk about how it is that we can further differentiate between the definitions between modeling and visualization.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think the confusion that a lot of people have is over how is the overlap or the implied overlap that exists between the development of visualization tools versus numerical groundwater availability models. And so, at least from my perspective, both historically and today, it was always important to compartmentalize what is the use of this, what is the use of a tool, such that a numerical model, a groundwater availability model, either finite difference or analytical model, those are tools that may be used to understand groundwater flow, to understand flow dynamics, to understand the impact of pumping in one area on another area. And so I compartmentalize those tools over on one side of the ledger, and then with the visualization tools, they are that. They are visualization tools. They can be used to help communicate with non-technical stakeholders. For example, what the aquifer looks like in the subsurface and where it's thick and where it's thin and components like that. But it's just always been very important to me to make a very clear distinction that in those geologic models, those models are not providing you any hydrologic information with respect to groundwater flow or anything like that, other than perhaps, it's a de facto TERS analysis where you can use the geometry that's in the visualization tool to come up with a volume of water perhaps in storage. And I don't know how everybody in the room feels about another tool to develop TERS reports, but that would be the limit of the hydrologic information that could be developed from a visualization tool.
Thank you.
I think one of the confusions with this discussion is that maybe the terms are perhaps not defined enough, and I think when we're talking about 3D modeling, we're really referring to numerical modeling, and when we're talking about visualization, that's something different that can encompass geologic models, but geologic models are not numerical models.
Thank you.
And I think I agree. There are 2 points here that I think they're critical that they're coming up. One of them is, what is the objective? What you're trying to achieve, either with a numerical model or with a 3D geological model? I think they're different. And when you have a numerical model, you also need to be able to communicate and let people understand how to use that numerical model, or how to get information out of that numerical model, and being able to visualize it and visualize that model in 3D and information in 3D, it's also possible. So I think it's the question of the concepts that they need to be probably refined.
Thank you. So hopefully the audience has kind of a sense of that. I think that there are some slight differences of opinion in terms of the usage of those models, but it seems to me that there's some general consensus about the need that the two are different in the definition. And the reason why we've stressed this point to you as an audience is that in the discussions about its application to management practices, I think it's important that we be clear about what 3D visualization can and cannot do, and then what 3D modeling can or cannot do, so that it's a fuller discussion about the management implications. So, Michelle, was there anything else in terms of the visual aid that you wanted to go through?
Right, there are a couple of slides. So in terms of 3D visualization, as we pointed out earlier, the groundwater availability models can be visualized in 3D. And in fact, the Texas Water Development Board has done this. So I took a screenshot from their website. This is the Ogallala Aquifer in the panhandle of Texas. And I wanted to show just what the GAM structure looks like in 3D here. And I encourage you to go to the viewer and check this out. An area where I've done additional work is Hemphill County. So the first slide shows the structure of the GAM. The second slide shows that same area, Hemphill County, modeled with the geology information in high detail and high resolution. And what you see there are sand in yellow and clay in gray. And the purpose of this is to really look in detail at the geology. And ultimately, the geology is going to affect groundwater flow, and getting a better understanding of localized geology will help the district understand flow in a site-specific way, in the future.
Thank you. Were there any further visual aids that we wanted to go through before discussion on? No? Okay, fantastic. So I asked our panelists to reflect a little bit on what the pros and the cons might be of 3D modeling and visualization. I know that those are a number of categories, so bear with us. But I'd like to try to really distinguish those two. So before we get to talking about some of the issues potentially, let's just focus on what are the benefits. And obviously, Michelle, you've really started that conversation off well in bringing up this example. Could I ask each of the panelists to speak to what the benefits of 3D modeling and visualization are, and how the benefits may be different between the modeling and the visualization, and how those benefits could be deployed by a district. And I might start on the end with Bill, if I may put you on the spot.
Well, so the benefits, so for groundwater districts and for GMAs, and even for the regional water planning process, statute is pretty clear that groundwater availability models as provided by the executive administrator are the de facto best available science for decision making. And so, so that is the tool of choice. And so until something happens to change that dynamic, I think that the use of groundwater availability models, three-dimensional groundwater availability models, to understand the hydrology and the resources and the system and the impacts from one area to another, that is going to be the benefits of those. The benefits of visualization, and I agree with Michelle. I can't remember who said this, but you can easily use visualization tools with the products of a 3D groundwater availability model, and so you can use those visualization tools for that, and so then the benefits are clearly that, as I said earlier, with those that are not trained, for example, to think of the subsurface in 3D, it can be a tool to help them understand exactly what an aquifer looks like and what it is they're trying to manage.
Thank you. Nate, I'd like to move on to you. Tell us about what your thoughts on the benefits between visualization, modeling, differences between the two, and how they may be deployed.
Well, I don't want to just reiterate what Bill said, but I guess to put it as succinctly as I can, I think models help us improve our understanding, and visualization allows us to communicate that understanding to stakeholders.
Thank you. Perfect. So the communication is really the differentiating factor and the actual benefit to the districts. Michelle, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I guess I just used an example. I was talking to Sonny Fitzsimmons before this session, and he gets a report of well water levels every month, and he gets one from a well that's on his property, and it's just a table. And I recently implemented a graphing system for him, and suddenly the understanding that he had just looking at the graph was at a lot higher detail. Now the models all spit out tables and numerical data, and some of them have visualization capabilities, but if you can create a really effective visualization, then that's going to make it a lot easier to communicate with your stakeholders.
Perfect. Thank you. Miguel?
I think visualization is critical. You can have a great model, but if nobody's seeing it, nobody understands it, and nobody's. It's basically being able to share it. It is pretty hard to get everybody on the same page. So at least on our side, what we learned through these last years, it's basically visualization. It's one of the critical parts. Building the model is definitely extremely important and having it accurate. But basically visualization, it's critical in terms of ensuring that everybody's agreeing and they have a single source of truth. And everybody understands and it's on the same page at the time of making decisions. So if everybody is looking at the same in a way that everybody understands it, that's when agreement can start coming in from different stakeholders within the groundwater industry.
Okay, thank you. So there continues to appear to be consensus among the panelists about the pros about 3D modeling and visualization, what the differences between the two are in the deployment, where we might see some of the differences and some of the concerns around the two and how they're used. And so once again, Bill, you've been, I think, pretty vocal about some of your concerns about the way that 3D visualization is used versus 3D modeling. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I don't think I've been very vocal before today. I mean, my concern is, like, I'll just give you an example. In the legislature, in the past legislative session, there was a bill that was filed to have someone other than the Water Development Board have developed what was being referred to as groundwater availability models, but what they were really talking about was more of the geologic model visualization tool. And my concern is that that's a distraction to the primary focus being on the development of good groundwater availability models. And that was a distraction that occurred during the most recently concluded legislature, and it was a distraction back in 2005, 2006, whenever we first started seeing some of these visualization tools being developed, because they were being developed in lieu of putting in the effort on the numerical modeling. And so, as long as my concern is, as long as they're being done conjunctively and there's plenty of resources available to do both, I'm totally okay with that. But when the visualization tool is being done in lieu of a focus on the numerical modeling and understanding the flow systems that one is responsible for, that's where I have a concern.
Thanks, Bill. Michelle, would you like to respond to that?
Sure. I'm an engineer with a very deep appreciation of geology, and I understand that geology controls the flow regime. The more we know about the geology, the better we're going to have an ability to develop highly detailed, high-resolution models that are site-specific in the future. So I think going to this degree of mapping geology is very important for the future of Texas. And I see 3D geologic models as the first step in developing more robust flow models, as well as mapping the resources that we have. I mean, they have great applications for brackish groundwater mapping as well. I see them as a high-resolution mapping tool. And also for stakeholder communication, when you look at a 2D map, well, my favorite movie is Star Wars from my childhood. I love watching that movie. When I look at a 2D map, it's like watching Star Wars on a 9-inch cathode ray tube in black and white. You know, it's okay. But when I'm looking at a 3D geologic model and working in a 3D environment, it's like watching Star Wars on a 4K TV with surround sound, and it's this entirely different experience. You get this immersive experience into what the aquifer is really like. So I think it can do a lot to inform our interpretations of geology and building up our data sets.
Thank you. Nate, would you like to chime in?
Sure. I mean, I agree with what has been said by Bill and Michelle, but I guess if we're in a resource-constrained environment, I would tend to lean towards collecting basic data so we can constrain the parameters that we need to feed models. And that includes geologic knowledge, but not necessarily visualizing that data. Because if we focus on visualizations at the expense of data collection and building realistic numerical models, then the visualizations might impart the perception of accuracy that really isn't there because we haven't done the basic work to collect the data and create the numerical models.
I think we can have the same problem with numerical models. We need to collect the data to support those models as well. There's a lot more that goes into numerical models as far as, we're looking at recharge data, we're looking at pumping data. There's a lot of data yet that we need to collect to make those models more robust as well.
So let's talk a little bit about that data collection, because I understand that, again, as a key difference between the model, the numerical model versus the visualization is the resolution of data points. And Mikkel, maybe you can speak to this a little bit just in terms of your pilot project you've been doing here. What's so critical to you in being able to have better visualizations, right, is the number of data points. Can you talk to us just briefly about that?
And I think it goes back. I think it goes back exactly to the model, to the objective of the model. No? In the project, in the pilot project that we're doing, the initial discussions we had with the Texas Water Development Board was the specific objective of a model. It was a regional model, so that model is not intended to allow you to run a specific permit plan to be able to manage a permit. So it's to look at the overall budget of a region. So, and if you want to go deeper, you need to have a more refined specific area in the model or having a local model. So I think it goes back exactly to understanding what was the objective of the model that was created, and then it depends then how much data you have. So we know that this is constrained. There is constraint in resources, and if you don't have as much data, the model is going to be okay, but it's going to be more of a regional model, not as much local, because it doesn't have as much data.
Thank you. Bill, for those people in the audience or watching over live stream that are unfamiliar with how a numerical model is built, can you talk to us a little bit about the type of data points that might be included in there so that we can understand that difference a little?
Right, so I'll use as an example a recently completed update to the Northern Trinity groundwater availability model. In that effort, there are in any groundwater availability model development, there are a number of data sets that one must develop. So for example, one thing one needs is a good understanding of historical water use. And so in order to do that, a lot of records were scoured from public water supply systems, from the Water Development Board's historic groundwater pumping data set, just a number of different resources, old historic literature on artesian wells in the 1880s, things like that are scoured and pulled together and synthesized to get understanding on, since man first started poked a hole in the ground, how much groundwater has been pumped out. And the reason that is so important is because that becomes a fundamental element of the calibration of the model to ensure that the model is accurately representing the system. Another thing, of course, is aquifer geometry. And so in the Northern Trinity, there was hundreds of geophysical logs, which are, at least in my opinion, are far superior to drillers' logs. And those geophysical logs are then correlated both on strike and on dip in multiple directions across the aquifer to understand where the different aquifer hydrologic units are, what the thicknesses of those are, what sort of characteristics those units have, and that all then becomes digitized to go into the model. Another data set is like hydraulic conductivity, and so a tremendous amount of effort was put into scouring like TCEQ records from old historic public water supply well permit applications, so that in the end hundreds of pump tests were collected and analyzed to constrain the transmissivity that goes into the aquifer, looking at groundwater surface water interactions. So you would be looking at stream gauge flow along the rivers that transect the aquifer to see whether or not the aquifers are gaining or the streams are gaining or losing. Look at recharge rates, look at historical, if there's any isotopic analysis that's been done in the recharge zones to look at the rate of recharge that might be occurring. So all these different data sets are pulled together. And so, like, for example, in the Northern Trinity groundwater availability model, there was approximately $1 million spent scouring all these different data sets to pull all that data together, then to build the actual numerical model that was then calibrated against the historical records. So that's not all the data that goes in to building a groundwater availability model, but that's sort of the high-level view of it.
Thanks, Bill. And Nate, the thing that always occurs to me about models, and the part about it that I think is really fascinating, is the potential margin of error in modeling, right? Could you talk to us a little bit about how you account for that, or how you should think about it?
Well, sure. With models, with numerical models in particular, where we encounter a problem which we call uniqueness, is that for any geologic system, there are multiple realizations of the parameters that could yield a model that matches the observed data. And the more data that we can scour from existing sources and the better data additional data we can collect, the more we can constrain our conceptual model of the system and the numerical model so that we can zero in on more accurate models. We can build models with, really great computing power that have really high resolution, and they will give us really precise values. But there's a difference between precision and accuracy, and we're not going to get more accurate models if we don't constrain them with good data. And so I would say if we want to make our models more accurate, we also have to look at doing basic data collection. If we're just going to keep updating GAMs using the same databases, we're not really going to create more accurate models.
Thank you. So what I'd like to do is take us now into a conversation about some of the implications maybe on groundwater management. And I know that that's a little bit of a stretch, and we certainly wanted to have Gabe's kind of thoughts, some of his thoughts that were down in the paper and had so much momentum around them. 3D modeling and visualization can positively impact management decisions as a decision support tool, specifically as we were talking about the benefits as a stakeholder communication method. Can each of you maybe comment a little bit on the ways in which you think 3D modeling and then 3D visualization can or will impact the way that groundwater districts make management decisions? Mikhail, I'll start with you.
I think from our experience, it's been all about collaboration between the different stakeholders, being able for the planners and managers to have a clear communication with the users, and whenever they're going to be able to make decisions, having a clear understanding and visibility of what's happening. So it's been the ability to be able to communicate, and I think that's the hardest part, and having everybody a single source of truth where they can look at.
Yeah, you and I have had several conversations about this concept of democratizing the water availability decisions and management decisions, which you are a strong proponent for.
That's the idea. I think it's being able, let's call it, democratize the models for getting the people to understand, being able to interact with them, being able to run simple scenarios, not complex scenarios. I think that's critical because that's what's going to get credibility to the models. I think if people don't believe on them, they won't use them. And I think in order for you to believe in them, you need to be able to first understand them and being able to work with them. I think just being able to get a report on a model, just a report on a CD that you don't get to be able to really understand, it is very hard. So our objective is to turn that in a third delivery model in which you visualize, interact, and are able to work with the model.
Perfect, thank you. And so that's where the decision support tool component. Michelle, would you like to comment a little bit about its potential application on management?
Sure. One of the ways that we've been using 3D models to communicate to stakeholders is when we look at some of these GAM runs, what do they look like in the context of the geology and of, in comparison to each other. So, like for example, Hemphill County, we wanted to understand how drawdowns might impact stream flow. So we modeled and visualized what the DFC at 80% volume and storage remaining looked like, what 70%, what 60%. We could see a very clear impact to stream flow between 70 and 60%. And that was just putting that in a 3D environment made it very easy to communicate what the effects of that model were. Another application is utilizing a 3D model to predict what drillers might encounter during drilling. And so during the permitting process, this is a service that the districts could provide to permittees and drillers, saying, this is what we know about the geology in our district. Here's what we think you might encounter. This will help you cost out the process and such. And then we go back and look at the geophysical logs and drillers' reports that come back in and make additional refinements. So we get a really good understanding of what the localized geology looks like in a district.
Thank you, Michelle. Nate?
I guess I'll just reiterate something that Bill said earlier, is that the numerical models are still our most effective tool available for looking at simulating future impacts and being able to look at hypothetical situations. And so from a management perspective, being able to play that what if is probably one of the most valuable things about the GAMs and other numerical models.
Great, thank you. Bill, what are your thoughts on the implications on management decisions by GCDs of 3D numerical models versus 3D visualizations?
Okay, I'm just going to preface what I'm going to say. This is a joke, but I'm going to say, on advice of counsel, I'm not going to answer that question. But not really. I mean, I'll be the first to admit I struggle with how a groundwater district would make an informed decision solely on the basis of a visualization, and I hope and maybe there are districts that do that, but I'm hoping that they're using I'm hoping they're using more of an analytical tool to make those decisions. But I would add to that the groundwater district decisions are not strictly technical, are not based solely on technical analysis. They're based on a technical analysis and a policy decision that district has to make. Just like the DFC process. The DFC process is not a technical, you don't send your technicians off into a corner and have them come back with the answer of what your DFC should be. That's a policy decision. And so whether it's an analytical tool, a numerical model or whether it's a visualization. The reality of it is the decisions that a district is going to be making are not just going to be on a technical data that's presented to them. There's going to be policy decisions that have to be made.
Thank you, Bill. That's a really important point. Thank you for bringing it up. So I'd like to close this discussion, unless one of you would like to engage each other on this discussion. I know that there's some differences of opinion there on issues moving forward and what issues you see emerging, if any, in the further development of 3D numerical models and 3D visualization. Technology, as we know, is always updating, improving, changing. So being in the field, what do you see kind of coming around the corner? Go ahead, Michelle.
Speak to this. Okay, so in the future, I'll echo Bill's sentiments. I don't think we're going to rely on just one tool. I think we use a suite of tools. We use 3D geologic models, we use flow models, we use databases. We saw a lot of these databases in development, and talked about it this week. I see information tools as a three-legged stool, that we need each component of that stool to get enough information to begin to inform our decisions. And I also agree that, no, a model doesn't make a decision for you. It's one tool you use to help.
Thank you. Miguel?
I think I'm on the same line as Michelle. I think it's integration between different tools. I think they're complementary. A lot of these tools we're discussing, they're complementary. But at the same time, I was thinking exactly as how we're evolving technology ourselves and what we're taking the platform. And I think the critical requirements that we listen in from the customers, it's number one, technology needs to allow for collaborative groundwater management. That's number one. The second one is proactive, and the third one is sustainable. So those are the three elements, and those three elements require different tools and technology to be integrated, and that's the idea in our side. That's what we're trying to do, being integrated in all the different elements to provide the solution to those needs.
Thank you, Miguel. Nate, did you want to chime in on what you see kind of coming around the corner for some of these tools?
I guess one of the issues that I see cropping up is that all these models are built by humans, and humans come to the table with inherent biases. Districts could be faced with proponents or applicants coming to the table with a model that they've created, and you've got to understand that the applicant has paid a contractor to develop that model, and so as good as the contractors are, they're coming to the table with an inherent bias when they create that model. And so you have to look at the actual process of even contracting the development of these models. The Texas Water Development Board does a very good job in contracting for these models and development, in trying to ensure that there isn't biases in them. But I think that's something to keep in mind from a management perspective.
Thank you. Bill, any thoughts on what might be coming around the corner with the development of this technology?
Right. So, and I'm not on. So it's almost been a decade since I retired from the Water Development Board, and I'm sure they're going to be really glad when I ride off into the sunset and quit talking like I still work with them. But I mean, I would say that the Water Development Board in 2001 was put in charge of the groundwater availability modeling for exactly what he just said, and that is to maintain the integrity of the models. But there was also another part of that, and that was there was a stated intent during the passage of Senate Bill 2 that especially the major aquifers that were under significant stress would be updated basically on a 5-year cycle. And so what my fellow panelists have talked about with respect to getting new data, collecting the data that's necessary to truly improve these models over time. A, that's going to be critical to maintaining those models, and B, if we don't, we might as well pull the plug on it. I mean, so it's going to take a long-term commitment. So if you're responsible for an area of a major aquifer that hasn't been updated in a while, you really need to be looking at, actively collecting the kind of information that's going to be necessary for that next update, and also working with the Water Development Board to make sure that your update is on their calendar for updates. And I don't do modeling, so that's not what I do. But I think the only way that the groundwater, and trust me, I was in Georgia yesterday, and I was helping them with the startup of this round of their state water planning. And from coast to coast, the Texas Groundwater Availability Modeling Program is the envy of every state in the United States. And so we really are going to have to maintain our dedication and focus to continually updating those models, especially in those areas where there are significant dynamic pressures on those resources, such as the Ogallala and the Carrizo-Wilcox and the Gulf Coast.
Thank you. Are there any closing thoughts from our panelists before I share with you a comment from Mike Turco via text message? No? So I think this is a great place to end. And Mike, forgive me, I didn't get your permission to read this out loud. You can be mad at me later. He said, 3D modeling is a part of to use 3D modeling as a part of a multifaceted approach to guide policy and to guide data collection. 3D visualization is a communication tool, and all models come with some degree of uncertainty. Invest resources and limit uncertainty through annual research and data collection programs. And I think that really just fits so nicely into some of the things that we've heard from our speakers through the conference about the need for better data and listening to the individual districts that have invested so many resources into having incredible visualizations or modeling. The districts investing into the models that the state had done, the districts also coming up with some of these visualization tools. So I think we're seeing those all coming in and really improving the industry overall. So with that, are there any questions from the audience? We don't have any Twitter questions. All right. Folks, let's thank these panelists for their wonderful job.